want to say, maybe I should say something before that. Sometimes I spoke, like in Helsinki, it was a relatively formal talk to faculty, to doctoral students, to people that were involved in formal research. But one of the things that is very important to me, and that's why I chose the word inquiry that could be understood more broadly, is that this thing is for teachers who really want to understand what is happening, what is fruitful, what is constructive, what is not constructive. In many ways, I come to think of it as self-cultivation, as self-education. So research is not on a pedestal. It's not something that kind of distinguished, pompous, dignified, and sometimes irrelevant professors do, but it has a vitality, it has an energy. And, you know, I think many of us ask ourselves occasionally, why are we doing what we are doing, right? Like, we could do many different things in our lives. And it seems to me that doing that kind of broadly called qualitative research is conducive to what Maxine Greene has talked about, seeing more, not just seeing as a piano, a computer, a chair, but seeing more, hearing more, taking more out of life. And that's really what I'm talking about. So absolutely for teachers, for people interested in more formal or semi-formal research, and as a way of self-cultivation. And, you know, as I think about my, you know, what it is that I would hope would happen in this session. So when you listen to me, I would be grateful if you ask, this is an invitation to ask, is it relevant? If so, what is relevant? Maybe what is not so relevant? Maybe there are dissonances there. Maybe there are things that are not addressing. So it's not so much informational. We can talk more about theories and other things, but in a sense what I'm looking for is that kind of resonance, including dissonance, and hopefully time for questions and discussions and conversations here formally, but we have 4 more days in the corridors or in other places. So these are points in my journey. I will talk about it as we go. The Tel Aviv Museum and Bayreuth in Germany, where some of the things that I talk about became clear. Stanford, California to the right, and my office in the College of Education in Illinois in the left. And just so you have a glimpse of what it's like. So one of the things that dawned on me is that I'm talking about embodied and aesthetic, and it seems to me that these are what I think of as the basso continuo. So for this thing to happen, you know, so many people have been working, but people like Edek and people like Piotrek and behind the stage managers that you don't even often know that they are unless there is a problem, something that is continuously present and that sometimes doesn't draw attention to itself. So embodiment was clearly, it's part of any research, and I will talk more about it. The aesthetic, I would like to think that it's part of the human nature. It's what we aspire to. But it's not explicit. Many textbooks, many places that people talk don't address these issues. And so some of the things that I'll talk about is the notion of tuning in that are embodied. When you really listen, when you attend to something, it's bodily, yes, it's mindful, it's affective. The notion of improvisation and responding to things. And I want to say something about improvisation because I think that people are born, and Maria Elena and I talked just a little about it, people are born improvising, right? I mean, that's the nature. Good conversations, good things are improvised. But in formal education, we often take out that. So in research, many people follow the textbooks and they become subservient and they lose their natural way to improvise. And so we don't have to learn something foreign. We just have to let go of the more rigid things that are often, not always, but often associated with research. And it really is a combination, you know, body, mind, and heart, they are integrated. They are not distinct in ways that people have talked about it. I'll talk particularly about the distances because that is a big part of both on the abstract level, the worldview of research, but but it's very related to issues in the art, and it's hugely related to who should be doing research. And given what we know about distances, it can be researchers that are outsiders, it can be insiders, it can be people in the whole spectrum. And so this has immediate implications to what we do. Okay, yeah. So some of the themes is, I'm starting with the juxtaposing distances, the bodily resonance, dissonance that is really important. And this morning I attended Liesel van der Merwe's and Catherine's Venting's talk, and it was such a beautiful example of dissonance where sometimes things don't work, there is frustration, there are things that don't. And in advocacy, we try to ignore them, we try to kind of rationalize, but in inquiry, in research, as you did in your talk, it's really something to understand, it's a point of inquiry. So resonance, and that was the museum exercise that we did in 2007 and that I'll quickly touch on here, it's part of trying to understand what is happening. Communal is really important. The fact that we are here, and it's a big part, of course, I understand now of Dalcroze, but the energy of the community. So yes, the researcher works alone with anticipation to the communal thing, and as I said, seeing more versus saying yes. I won't talk a lot about, I want to get a sense, how many people in this room are teachers? In any level? Okay, thank you. How many people are researchers? Of course, many. Okay, excellent. How many people are learners? All of us, right? Yeah, okay, students for life, yeah. I want to say, it could be repetitive, but I will speak quickly, just for a couple of minutes, to have a shared basis for what we are talking. So methods, I'm starting with the most pragmatic things. When I say research, I assume qualitative, but yeah, so you can stop me and we can talk more about things that need to be talked. So a central technique, observations that are not only structures, but open-ended. And we use our body to get a sense of, to tune in, to be part of that. And I will talk more about that. Interviews. And one of the things that I do, my students in Illinois ask me when I teach qualitative research, at some point they asked me, can you model for us an interview? And I thought it was an interesting request, and I had two different people, and I had, one person, Maria Elena, and another person, Catherine, or whatever, one after another, talk with them. And my students made observations, and of course, they could see so much better than I could, right? Because I was inside. And they were talking a lot about the body. When I was tuning towards them, what I was doing, all the things that were implicit, that I didn't calculate, I didn't plan to do it, and it was quite fascinating. So there is a lot, because of course, if you think of structured interviews, so I could ask you, what did you have for breakfast today? Or how long did it take you to come from wherever you are to Katowice, to this place? So there could be things that are structural. And you may want to look at the images. These images, some people may know Steinar Kvale. He's a Norwegian that lived in Denmark and did qualitative research. So here's two models of interviews. The first one is a gold miner. So there is gold, there are the facts, and we are trying to find this objective thing. So if you tell me whatever you had for breakfast, we had a beautiful buffet in Hotel Q this morning, every morning. And so one can be very specific about what each of us chose to eat. And this is objective reality. We can kind of quantify it. If somebody goes and weighs carefully, we can, we know exactly what was eaten. But the second one is typically the heart of qualitative research, and this is the traveler. And so this is like, what was it like to come to Katowice on Saturday or Sunday when you came? What do you experience? What is it like to be on the first day or the opening reception? What is the experience of being a student or a teacher or this or that? And this is very much about lived experience, as the phenomenologists would talk. And it's also very clear that if I'm asked by two people and one of them really listens well and probes and wants to get a sense, and the other one does things dutifully, I've had that, they have a list of questions and they go one by one, my answers would be different, right? Because we are responding to how it's done. And so in that sense, that objectivity, or people in different, we talk to somebody. Even when we write papers, we talk to an imagined editors or people that reviewers. So the notion of that dialogical conversations or interviews is very much part of qualitative research. The last one that is extremely important that we can go more later is the notion that data analysis, so we go and collect data or gather data, and then we do initial analysis, and that initial analysis informs the second round of data collection. So it's not that we finish the data collection and then we analyze, it's very simultaneous. Just a couple of minutes. So I was trained as a musician. I'll talk a little about that. I knew that I had fingers because I don't know if Loretta is here, but we talked this morning. So I started to play the piano young and kind of improvised. And when I was at 5.5, went to formal teaching, the teacher was very worried because my technique was awful. And so she said, I'll take her if my parents promised that I would not improvise at home. So it was always kind of fingers and a particular kind of sitting, but it wasn't the sense of the body in the way that we experience it, in the way that is very basic, fundamental to how you think about Dalcroze. And I remember reading a relatively early chapter, showed us somatic modes of attention are cultural elaborated ways attending to and with one's body. And these things are cultural because the word somatic sometimes is used as if it's not a part of a culture, but it is. An eye contact, a body language, how far, how close, how much. I know that Michelle praised that I won't be using my hands too much because it's not such good quality. Where is Michelle? Anyway, if I'm using my hands too much, you can tell me and I can try and restrain myself. It's partly cultural, right? So these things are, of course, personal, cultural, and they are, of course, part of music, but they are hugely part of research, something that has not been addressed. Body memory, Marie-Helena Juntunen wrote lovely about it in 2002 and 2004 and later. My own, when I looked for a title of a book in 2004, I liked the idea of knowing bodies. I realized then that the body has knowledge and wisdom in ways that often are deeper than my mind, and that the mind is moving. It's not so static, it's not. And as we said, the body is present in performing, in listening, in every conversation, in every interview. When you sit here and talk, there is something about your body that, to me, signals that you are attending. And of course, you could have said very differently. I have to say, many years ago, I gave a talk in Brazil, and I was translated simultaneously. And it was shocking for me. Nobody looked at me. It was hundreds of people. Nobody looked at me. And they all were very tuned into their headphones. And I was shocked and saddened that it was painful for me to talk because there was no reciprocity. If somebody would have told me about that, I would have been surprised. And I forgot about it. But now that I look at you, I remember that other situation. And so there is a way in which it's extremely close, and we'll get to the dimensions of that. So now that we talk about methods and embodiment, I want to say something about the worldview, the fundamental assumptions that generate these methods, because methods are ways to conduct the bigger beliefs. So the basic thing, of course, is that social reality is constructed. So there are many people here, and it's possible that what different people attend to is not the same, that you will attend, that you will remember different things. The classic metaphor that many of you would be familiar is the 6 blind men and the elephant, one near the trunk, one near the back, one near the nose, the ears, and they are situated in different places, and so the reports on the elephant are different. They are not wrong, they are not lying. But sometimes it's easy to forget that. We expect somehow, I assume that other people see the world in the way that I do. And so that notion of a perspective is extremely important. And the reason why I am emphasizing it is that in the positivist tradition, that I will talk in a few minutes more, then, you had to be objective, you had to be outside. So the idea of a teacher doing research on their classroom was unacceptable because they were not objective. Well, what is obvious within this paradigm of multiple realities is that we can never be objective outside of social reality. We are always situated somewhere. Whether we are men or women in our 20s, 40s, or 60s, whether we live in this part of that, we always have a particular perspective. When it comes to social construction, we cannot avoid it. And I want to make the distinction, going back to the interviews, that when I take a plane, as many of us did, to come to Poland, I'm very grateful that there is objective reality, because the people, the engineers that constructed the plane, it's not that it may, it's okay on the Atlantic, but maybe not on the Pacific, not in Eastern. No, there are ways in which it's tested, and unless some accidents, I expect it to work. It's different. That's where the gold miner, remember 2 slides ago, this is useful. There are things that are objective. One can measure, all sorts of things. But when it comes to the stuff of qualitative research, lived experience, cultural experience, it's extremely important to know that it is perspectival and the context shapes the meaning. So Marilena and I talked yesterday, the color red. I remember being in Taiwan, and actually we'll start with the color one. There was a wedding party, and so I had a white dress that I wanted to wear, and my friends and hosts looked at me and said, not really, you don't want to go white for a wedding. White is the color of funerals. And then we talked about red. It means one thing in Taiwan and another thing in Finland and still another thing in Poland. And there are all sorts of to bull, in bullfights. Think about Madrid. The same color, the same eye contact. One of the stories that I sometimes tell is that when I came to Illinois, I have done interviews before that for my research, but I never took classes in interviews. So I asked one of my colleagues, very nice man, who just passed away, he has been teaching classes in interviews. And I asked him, what am I doing? And so the first thing that he said to me is, your eye contact is too strong. He said, here in the Midwest, it looks confrontational. It looks aggressive. Now, in the culture that I came from, a strong eye contact meant I'm listening to you, I'm bonding with you, I'm with you. And when the second thing that he said when my interviewee was talking to me, I asked them why. And he said, again, the same thing. He said, he sounds too confrontational, too aggressive. And I was kind of baffled. I said, but what can you say? And he said, well, here we say things like, how very interesting. Tell me more about it. So it's a kind of very gentle. So even something like eye contact before any language already assumes a particular cultural things. And we are always situated, the point that I made earlier, oops. Yeah, this is, I don't know how many people have read Clifford Geertz. We talked about ethnography. Man is an animal suspended in webs of significance he himself has spun. So it's actually a quote from Max Weber, and Geertz made it famous. But we create these cultural norms, and then we behave as if they exist outside of us, and they do. The last methodological point that I want to make to frame this talk is the notion of goals. We really want, as I said earlier, to see more, expansion of meaning, not reduction, not causality, not, if you drop this, it would go to the earth. One of the stories that goes, there's children did multiple tests in schools, and many children, there was a word called fly and different kind of animals, including bird and fish and zebra and elephant, and many children wrote elephant. So objectively, fly and an elephant is a mistake, but there was one qualitative research there, and when he asked the children, some of the children, why did you circle elephant? And they asked him, oh, haven't you heard about Dumbo? Do you have him Dumbo, the elephant, the flying elephant. The meaning of flying elephant, it still is a mistake, but the meaning is totally different when you think of Dumbo as when you think in these categories. And the notion of depth, and that we can talk about any of these relating to your work, but the notion that it's never generalizable because it is contextual, but the writer provides enough context so the reader can transfer and say, this is relevant. You know, Taiwan, Poland, so different, but there are some similarities, some things that do transfer. I asked Maria Elena to tell me when I speak too fast, because I was notorious for speaking too fast, but I also delegated to any of you if you want me to speak slower or faster, because I'm trying so hard to speak slow that I'm too slow. Feel free. Okay, thank you, thank you. So this is such a lovely, really beautiful example of companionship. And I think a big part for me in academia was companionship. And companionship, absolutely, fellow researchers, but people from other parts too. So I could have many slides here that talk about that, but I will just touch on some. John Dewey, and I remember reading 1934, his book, Art as Experience. And on the very first page, he says, art is intensified experience. And I really loved it because I read aesthetic things before, Kant and Hegel and others, and they left me cold. But there was something about that notion that he elaborates, intensified experience, that really is quite powerful. And I thought, but research for me is an intensified experience because normally I'm very quick, I zoom, I don't see, I don't hear, quite superficial. But when I do research, everything becomes magnified. And then it talks about recognition versus perception, and we'll talk more, but recognition is kind of a quick thing, and perception is the full embodied thing. Elliot Eisner to the right, I don't know if Chris is here, but I know that Chris knows him, and many other people, of course, may have known him or read his work. And he introduced to research the notion of knowledge beyond the verbal, visual, and in other ways. Jen Urquhart, some people may know her, a dancer, head of department in Illinois, and she was the one, she came to Illinois in 2006. We met, she gave a talk in my class, and then she asked me if I would do authentic movement with her. How many people here have heard about authentic movement? Okay, you see, I've never heard about it, but we have been doing it since then, and it's quite powerful, and I realized that I knew that there was knowledge in the body, but I experienced it differently having done consistent authentic movement with Jen. Rashomon is a movie by Akira Kurosawa. Is there anybody here that I've seen the name? It's 1950 movie. It's very powerful, and you have the same situation, a woman being raped, a husband killed, narrated by 4 or 5, depending on how you count, 5 different people. And each of the people sees, of course, their stories are different, but the stories are different sometimes because they want to present themselves in a better light. Much of the time, I think it's genuinely seeing and noticing and attending different things. And that was a powerful movie for me to see, kind of illustrating the experience of how we perceive the world and the stories that we tell other people and ourselves. This one, some of people here know, in dance maybe, know Sue Stinson. And Sue's writing on embodiment were very interesting and relevant to me. This one is actually something very basic when she wrote, but important to say. The music we listen to during our high school and college years is the music that most resonates with us. And then she makes the point the same for theories. When you're exposed to particular theories in your doctoral studies or master or whatever. And it's very clear that people that have experienced dull cause, I think, bring not just to teaching, but maybe to life, a disposition that is different. And I would say that research experiences, and that's really the point of my talk, that it's important to have research experiences that are fluid, that are not so theoretical that we become disembodied and we lose that vibrancy. And so that notion of how do we unculturate ourselves. This is me when I was 3 years old. It's actually a Polish piano that was just bought a few months before. And one of the things that I keep thinking, and in the spirit of invitation to you to say what it is that you bring, I think that the earliest sense of myself is playing as a very young child. This was folk songs, Israeli folk songs mostly, and a large, we don't have the audience because they came later, but in few minutes after that you will have 20, 30, 40 people come, and everybody would sing. This was the 50s, and the sense of singing together and having a sense of a communal, and again, Liesl and Catherine Stock this morning captured the beauty of singing, whether it's in church or folk songs or other things, the vibrancy, the sense of being together. And that is something that I think I'm grateful to have had at such an early age. There were other things that, you know, my degrees were in performance and pedagogy, and I would say that there are things that I learned what not to do, that kind of some of the rigid classical music that is disembodied, not disembodied, but rigid, yeah, that is the best word, that I knew that doesn't work. In philosophy, I loved some disciplines. I found aesthetics often to be, again, disconnected, so abstract that you didn't have a sense of the energy in research experience. So this is my own, each of us has a different one, and it's in the spirit of invitation to say what formed us, you know, wherever we are here. I want to talk about this, and I talk sometimes, often when I speak about research, because for me this was what Norman Danzin calls epiphany, where I became very conscious of things that I was never conscious before. And now I'm not joking, I will try to speak, I don't want to take so much time, but it is useful. So you see a move from my home country of Israel to the United States, because my husband decided he wanted to do his doctorate in the United States. So change of culture, change of disciplines, because in Israel I was a musician and musicologist, and I was working at the museum, you saw it before, and as luck had it, I stumbled on Elliot Eisner. How many people have read his work or heard about him? Okay, so some people, yeah, quite a few. I had no idea who he was, but he was very energizing. He was kind of vibrant, and I met him, and I found his class captivating. Somebody took me there. And so I thought, should I do a doctorate? Because when you're at Stanford, what else can you do except a doctorate, right? If you're lonely and vulnerable and don't know what to do with your life. But so just as I was thinking of that and planning to actually to enroll, he called me and he said, are you interested in being my research assistant? And I said to him, I cannot do that. He said, why not? He was a little surprised. I said, because I don't know anything about education. This is all relevant to the story. And he said, no, in Stanford we don't speak like this. We say, I'm very competent, I can do anything, I will be just great. And you know, but I wanted to try it, and so we went to the class, and in the class, and what you can see is the class, and then for those, there is kind of music notation, sitting in the classroom, having nothing to write, nothing. When I said I didn't know anything about education, it was true. I didn't know what curriculum was, I didn't know what pedagogy was, I knew nothing. And I sat there for almost half an hour, very kind of overwhelmed, and then I thought, well, I have to write something, and I was a musicologist, I was a music critic. I could look at this classroom in terms of form, right? There is a form to the classroom, there is a rhythm to the classroom, there are all of these things, there is orchestration, and I gave Elliot this report looking at the classroom through musical lenses. Elliot thought that it was extremely original and brilliant, and of course I was neither original nor brilliant. I was ignorant and desperate. It's true, because if I knew anything about education, I would have written something more conventional, but I didn't. And this is what I realized was the notion of unknowing as generative, because suddenly I realized that not knowing was actually helping me. And of course, I have to emphasize, if you can imagine my words in the color red, to say, I was also lucky because I stumbled on the one person in the universe whose view of qualitative research, as many of you know, is modeled after criticism, art criticism. But I was even luckier because he knew a lot about visual art, but he didn't know that much about music. And I brought something that fitted with his paradigm in music. And so, of course, luck and the stars align had to do a lot to do with it. But in terms of epiphany, what it taught me is that each of us brings ways of seeing and interpreting the world, and that there is lots of richness, that it's not a particularly good idea to try and reduce all this richness. Yes, then to think, is it relevant? Does it really help us to see more? And when there were 4 other Stanford students that were in the classroom, it was very interesting to compare notes because their papers were excellent, but mine, like theirs, allowed us to see something different. And so it was a very privileged, I would say, entry into the world of research that was highly experiential. And so these are some of the things that I talked about, the temporality, the rhythm, the dynamics, all of these things that were very relevant to making sense of this. It was a math classroom. But after, I remember, getting my dissertation several years later and thinking about this episode, which I haven't thought that much, and then asking myself, what else have I learned when I was a musician? Because when we learn music theory, I never was presented it with, okay, this is a form and this is a rhythm and counterpoint, and when you go through life, look at these dimensions. No, it was very specific to music, but it's possible to do transfer, it's implicit. And so one of the things that I realized that I won't go into detail here is that when I play chamber music, there is a kind of listening to each other and being in tune with each other that I think I brought to my interviews. It was really interesting that you're kind of really tuning and really trying to get a sense, and there is a flow. And I realized that, again, it's very fundamental to the Dalkos, that attentiveness to others. But I didn't know that, and it's not in the textbooks. I have many, many textbooks of research in my shelves, and people don't speak about this because it's not part of that tradition. The last big point that I want to make, and I will elaborate on this, is the notion of, going back to Dewey, the notion of intensified experience. And thank you for invoking that but that concept has been important to me. And so, and now I'll go to the second line, the notion of expansion. So I'm not very visual, but it takes people like Van Gogh, or other great artists for me to be able to see chairs and expression and landscapes in ways that are fuller. And I would say that that's really a deep purpose of research, that you want to look at something and to be able, in Dewey's world, to perceive, to see more richly. And here is the point that relates to doing things in our own classroom or culture. Until I left Israel, I had no idea that I had an eye contact or body language. Everybody, that was the way to be, right? It was only when I came to a different place that, and there is the saying, the fish is the last one to discover water. And the one to the right is inspired by a former student from Singapore who used to write to me notes like, "You little flying fish." And I asked her, what is the flying fish? And she said, well, when you talk about it in class, my metaphor for myself is trying occasionally to jump out of the water, to see how it's like and then to go back. So the notion of trying to change a perspective, trying to go beyond what we normally do. And so when we do research in settings that are very familiar, it really is a challenge, right? Because often we don't notice what is actually happening. I'm trying, because I have about 10, 12 more minutes, but the recognition that when we as teachers, when I try to be reflective and observant on my immediate surrounding, this is from Peter de Bola, who is a statistician, the ordinary is too close for attention, extraordinary in its ability to go unremarked. And the last line is that what it means, and here the flying fish is a relevant metaphor, it's useful to change distances, to come closer and go further. Data collection, interviews, observations are oftentimes where we come closer. Data analysis is a place that goes further. Even in data collection, sitting here or there, being in different places can make a difference. And I want to include, just to say something in the larger history of research methodology, all of us have heard about the positivists, the people that when you claim objectivity and distance, and it's not, when you work with rats or mice, it's maybe not so difficult to be disconnected. It's quite natural, as many of the sciences have done. And I want to say as a footnote, they did it with a very good reason. If you think of Galileo Galilei and Giordano Bruno, we don't want to get into that Pandora box right now, but their insistence on objectivity was extremely useful for science. So I'm not negating it, only in the context of the kind of social research that we want to do. And historically, that paradigm was interestingly challenged or started to be eroded, one of the people that eroded it, by a Polish guy called Boris Malinovski. Many of you may know him. Here he's sitting in the middle, and he was an anthropologist born in Poland, Krakow, I think. He went to Papua New Guinea for a few weeks, as people typically did that, and was planning to stay there for a short time, but it was 1914, First World War up, and he was not allowed as a Polish guy to go back to England because they were not in the same camp. So he stayed there for 4 years. And after 4 years, look at the body language, look at the way that he's sitting there. He is remarkably dressed differently, but at that point, he had to learn their language. He had to understand a little, in ways that were not done before, what life looked from that perspective. And so that notion of we are always in a perspective and we need to come closer to the people that we observe. We need to ask them, what is the meaning of this Dalcroze session for the 17th, 80s? We saw, I don't know if Hélène Nicolette is here, but we talk about all these older people that she was doing in Geneva, observing, and their meaning-making, not just for other people to make meaning for them, because we don't have the concepts. In the spirit of time, for those of you that I told you that one of my contexts is movies. This is, I don't know if the Swedish people are here, but it's a great Norwegian film that is kind of a smile or a laugh at the Swedish people. Kitchen Stories, go and see it. It's a researcher, you see him on the letter there. He's supposed to be distant and not to learn anything. Have you seen it? And he doesn't learn anything. It's only until he becomes closer to the Norwegian farmer that he's able to get into the real stuff. So if you haven't seen it, it's warmly recommended as a model of research. I think I'm in my last few minutes, and I just want to give an appetizer for some of the things, because one of the issues with abstraction is, so how do you actually go about doing things? And I will just give a flavor of some of the things following up on that class in Helsinki. But this is actually from a book by an Australian that lived in England for many years, John Armstrong. I don't know, Rosemary, if you know him, you do. So I stumbled on his book, Come Closer or Move Closer, an intimate philosophy. And I thought, wow, intimate philosophy of art. I didn't know that philosophy could be intimate. I liked it. And then the things that he talked about reminded me of the way I used to play music as a pianist. So, and I want to say, these are not stages. They are aspects. So you can start anywhere, you can move in any way. You don't have to finish one to get to 2 to 3, right? You can aspects, playful, go back and forth, back and forth. So noticing detail, very important, like that. Seeing relations between parts, this motive in all of these places, in the bass, in different sections, seizing the whole as a whole. I chose the Magritte picture because it's kind of funny to see how the whole works with a Magritte, which makes him a Magritte. But these are important, and these are all kind of task-oriented. The fourth one is really interesting. I love this word, the lingering caress, and it's dialogic. It's when you get stuck and you start to work with it, and to me that's often the place of perception, if I want to combine it with the Dewey quotation. And it's, as I said, open-ended and not as structured. The fifth one for me is the mutual absorption. When I carry a Magritte or a Schubert or a Bach or the Beatles in a way that it becomes part of me. They become part of what I'm constituting. And I realized that this is very much the process for research. In research, wherever we start, we can start in different places, but we include these details and relations and the whole, and being stuck, the lingering, where I'm stuck and I thought I'm the only one, I'll never get out of this, and and when I stay with it, things start to have a new meaning. It's actually quite necessary for that. And the absorption where I get what I'm talking about, where it becomes part of my understanding of the world, what it means to be in this age, in this stage, in this particular thing. I want to say that I added, as a teacher, as a presenter, thank you, yeah. I added, and then also tell me when to stop, because I can go there. So the left one, so the right one, Mare Peraya, how many people have heard Mare Peraya? Good pianist, great pianist, yeah. And so this is when we actually perform, but I thought the left one is blurred. Christian Zimmermann, one of the my great Polish pianists and one of my favorites. And so even when I just think about a presentation or a talk, there is something about anticipation of teaching, anticipation of talking that actually can bring that. So communication for me, the prospect of communication already triggers these other 5 aspects. And I think it's relevant to music, it comes from visual arts, and for me it's relevant to research. So this is a kind of a summary, and it's really about cultivating, I think, of habits of mind, but also heart and spirit, body, of course. The notion of connection and tuning, which we all have as human beings, I like to think, but as part of research. The notion of cognition and affect and embodiment that are intertwined, the notion of improvisation, which we already possess, but important to integrate with qualitative, open-ended, unstructured aspect of research. The notion of contextualization, which means to step beyond and to say, but how does it fit with the bigger picture, whether it's colors or eye contact or body language. The notion of inquiries that are unfolding, the interplay between the individual, there is a lot of work for the individual, of course, and then it's within a communal, so that relationship and the notion of performance. This one, there are 22 more slides, don't panic, I'm not even getting into that, but these are the exercises that we did play of variation in Helsinki and that I do with my students in Illinois. And it gets into, it starts with saying, choose, this is just kind of a beginning. Choose 2 artworks, one that you like, one that you don't like, which could mean aversion or neutrality, and they're different. Stay with them, stay for 30 minutes, but also 40, 45. Some people stay for 1 hour. And one of the things is that when you stay with something, you start to see in ways that are different. It's structure, the themes, the abstraction, the unfolding inquiry, wanting to generate questions, it all comes out of that. One of the things, if we had time, we probably won't, to read the excerpts of the papers, one of the things that I tell my students is that the body is central, and so they need to be attentive to their body. And then in the expert of the students, actually Sven is one of the people that wrote a chapter in the book that Maria-Elena has shared. So attending to the body is part of seeing and making meaning, and it's a very grounded, basic things that most people haven't done, and it's quite effective. I think because it's probably end of time, so what I would like to do is just show, this is the first page. Yeah, maybe I'll just leave it as it is now, and then people can ask questions. Yeah, this is the particular artwork. One of the things, of course, that happens is that even in a small group, this was a very small group, 6 or 7 people, the same work that somebody likes is disliked by another person. And it's really interesting because when they talk about what they see, and sometimes even the images and the pictures are different. So maybe when people ask questions, I can move that along. Yes, then it's kind of very self-humorous. would I like it more? Would I be able to see it? And he talks a little about embodiment, not much, but the person after him, Leah, who is a dancer, Leah Lohnert, and she is now a faculty in Sweden, she talks about her embodied response to it in ways that are very, very different from Sven. See, he does all these numbers, 21, 21 pellets. He makes notes of the figures, does the sounds, later he discovered it. So there are many ways when you look at an artwork to approach it. Yeah, so we don't get that much of embodiment, but I would say that even after just a brief morning in this conference, I really want to take this exercise to embodiment in ways that I didn't do before. And of course, I would acknowledge the Dalcroze and the whole thing, because there is so much that can be done that is more vibrant. Yeah, but I feel the step with my hand before I sit down, the dirty, the symbol. So it's both symbolic, physical. There are lots of perceptions. I think this is not a proper ending, like Beethoven and Schubert and even folk songs. They will be horrified, but it's not really an ending because there will be questions and there will be continuation. So I would say this would be a time for me to stop. I will just leave with the image. This is Leah, the second one, and I want to show you that image of the same thing that for Sven was kind of almost marginal, and it's a different kind of thing. So with that,